Welcome, my soft-thinking listener. You've found yourself in the company of the Sleepy Sloth once again. A slow, scientifically minded fellow, who enjoys facts, old inventions, and the peculiar ways humans have moved across frozen surfaces. I must tell you something before we begin. Today, I consider myself a scientist in skates. Not the shiny modern ones of rinks and blades, but the ancient ones, fashioned from bone. A scientist wannabe who is almost always correct, except for those few times when I am not. But even then, I prefer to drift gently onward, rather than fuss over it. Because what truly matters is the information itself. Before I start, please, let me know. What is the most boring thing you would secretly love hearing about? Let me know gently, in the comments. Now, let us begin today's episode with the very earliest bone ice skates. The story begins around 3,000 years before the Common Era, in the quiet lands that we now call Finland. Here, fragments of horse bones and elk bones were carefully shaped into flat, smooth runners. These were not skates in the sharp-bladed sense we know today, but rather, soft tools of survival, tied gently to the feet with strips of leather. One did not glide swiftly, but shuffled, gently propelled by poles or careful steps upon the icy plains. The bones, worn down by scraping, showed clear evidence of intentional shaping. A slow human decision to turn what once carried muscle and marrow into something that carried footsteps across the white silence. The land of Finland, with its still lakes and long winters, gave no rush to its people. And so the bones became the first companions of icebound travel. You may not care. And that is completely fine. 2,000 years before the Common Era, we drift softly northward, into Sweden. There, in ancient burial mounds, archaeologists found bone skates placed beside the bodies of the departed. A curious detail, for it suggests that these humble artifacts held a meaning beyond simple transport. Perhaps they were seen as tools for the afterlife, or perhaps they were merely possessions tucked gently with the deceased. These bones, weathered and light, were strapped to feet the way sandals might be bound, yet their purpose was to carry one across frozen waters rather than dusty ground. To imagine a person slipping them on, long ago, is to imagine silence broken only by the scratching of bone on ice, the faint hiss of air over frozen surfaces. Nothing fast, nothing sharp, just the steady monotony of progress across a winter plain. And in this monotony, there is comfort. Let us float gently onward, toward the first millennium before the Common Era, where Norway's frozen lakes stretched like mirrors under pale skies. Here, bone skates again appeared, this time more clearly as everyday tools of transport. Imagine villages separated by water that froze into a sheet of glass for months at a time. The hoomans, not content to trudge endlessly around the edges, sought instead to glide, or at least scrape, directly across. The bones, carefully filed smooth, offered less friction than bare feet or leather shoes. With poles in hand, they would push themselves forward, slow but steady. These were not the games of sport, not the leisure of rinks, but the simplest way to shorten journeys in a landscape that otherwise lengthened them. And so, bone and ice became unlikely allies in human persistence, each slow scrape echoing across still valleys. By the 5th century before the Common Era, in what is now Russia, bone skates continued their quiet service. Near rivers, archaeologists found them, their surfaces polished by countless trips across frozen channels. To skate then was not for joy, but for survival, reaching food, reaching neighbors, reaching places otherwise cut off by winter. The rivers, frozen solid, became highways, and bones became the shoes that unlocked them. Leather straps, stiff with cold, held the bones tight to human feet. Each piece of bone told a tale of repeated sharpening, smoothing, and reshaping. This was not artistry. This was not excitement. This was the patient work of ordinary people solving ordinary problems. No one celebrated these skates. They were not trophies, nor ornaments, but tools. And perhaps that is why they are so quietly beautiful. Softly, we drift into the first century of the Common Era, where the low, watery lands of the Netherlands stretched wide beneath muted skies. Here, evidence whispers of bone skates, fashioned from the long, sturdy bones of animals, their edges worn smooth by careful scraping. These were tied to human feet with leather bindings, straps cut from hides and pulled tight, holding bone against soul in a union of human ingenuity and the quiet patience of materials. They were not the swift instruments of modern skating, but rather slow companions for winter travel, sliding more than gliding, shuffling more than soaring. In this part of the world, canals and rivers would freeze into long corridors, and people found ways to cross them more directly. The bone beneath their feet carried echoes of the animals that once roamed fields and forests, now repurposed into tools of winter passage. The leather, stiffened by cold, creaked softly as it held each piece in place. One might imagine the sound, subtle scraping, faint crunching, echoing gently across a silent, frozen expanse. No one asked for this sound, but it existed, a small, enduring rhythm of human adaptation. And in such unremarkable detail, there lies something enduringly calm. And then, as the slow current of history carries us onward, we arrive around the 2nd century, back in the snow-laden stillness of Finland. Here, skates fashioned from animal bone found not only their purpose in travel, but also in the art of hunting. To picture this is to imagine hunters gliding, ever so softly, across frozen lakes, closing distance more quietly than footsteps would allow. The skates, not sharp, not efficient by modern measure, offered instead a muffled glide that left little sound to disturb the wary animals beyond the reeds. Poles may have been used for steady propulsion, pushing against ice to move forward, each motion deliberate, each pause thoughtful. The bones themselves, likely from elk or horse, held a durability that suited repeated use, their polished surfaces reflecting the persistence of those who depended upon them. Hunting on bone skates was not swift, not dramatic, it was a methodical partnership between cold, silence, and patient human need. Every scrape of bone on ice told a quiet story of endurance. It may seem unremarkable, almost dull. And yet it reveals so gently how humans shaped their lives to the frozen world around them. Gently onward we drift, into the 4th century, where Sweden's use of bone skates evolved in subtle ways. Here, archaeologists have uncovered signs of improved leather bindings, small adjustments that speak volumes about patience and care. Instead of loose straps that slipped or shifted, more refined bindings offered a tighter, steadier fit, reducing wobble and lending greater stability. Though such a detail may sound insignificant, for the one moving across ice, it meant fewer interruptions, fewer falls, fewer moments of frustration. Imagine the sensation: the leather, softened by handwork, adjusted carefully around ankle and foot, holding bone close to skin. It was not elegant, but it was dependable. To see progress measured not in leaps of invention but in the small tightening of straps is to appreciate the quiet rhythm of human persistence. Skating on bone in Sweden was less about novelty and more about necessity, an unremarkable solution used year after year, improved gradually as generations passed the practice along. It is in such minute improvements that history moves, not in sudden strides but in slow, almost invisible steps, each one as soft and steady as the last. And now, like a faint mark etched into stone, we arrive in the 6th century, where Norway offers another gentle glimpse into the story of bone skates. Early carvings in rock art begin to depict figures upon ice, their feet bound with shapes that resemble bone runners. These depictions do not shout, they do not sing, they merely hint at a practice so ordinary it barely deserved more than a carving line or two. Yet in this simplicity lies remarkable persistence. To carve a skater into stone is to acknowledge that skating was known, practiced, and worth remembering, even if only as a passing image. The figures are not detailed, not intricate, but they tell us that bone skates had seeped into the daily fabric of life, enough to be noticed, enough to be scratched into rock by hands that sought to record what was familiar. These images connect the physical object to cultural memory, turning ordinary travel into something symbolically enduring. Though no great stories are tied to them, no songs sung, these quiet carvings become the faint echo of lives lived slowly, across ice, in winters that seemed endless. Let us now glide further, into the 8th century, where in Russia, a small but significant change emerged. Burial sites from this period reveal bone skates edged not just with bone, but reinforced with iron strips. This subtle modification marked a transition, an acknowledgement that bone alone, though serviceable, could be improved by the strength and sharper edge of metal. Iron allowed for smoother movement, longer wear, and perhaps even a more efficient glide across frozen rivers and lakes. These were no longer merely practical tools, their presence in burial suggests symbolic meaning, carried into the afterlife as objects of importance. To place them beside the deceased was to say, here is something you may need, even beyond life itself. The combination of bone and iron reflects a meeting of old and new, ancient tradition shaped by newer technologies. And yet, even with iron edges, the skates remained humble, slow, and ordinary, serving not to dazzle but to persist. A small change, an almost invisible refinement, whispering that human patience with winter had found yet another modest ally. Softly, we drift into the quiet landscape of the Netherlands around the year 1000 of the Common Era, where winters lay long across the low, water-filled country. Here, a gentle but important shift took place. Bone, the old companion of frozen travel, began to give way to wood. Early wooden skates emerged, carved carefully from sturdy pieces, shaped into runners that rested beneath the feet. The transition was not sudden, not abrupt, but slow. As one material whispered its limitations and another offered a new kind of patience. Bone, though serviceable, wore down quickly, while wood allowed a longer runner, a broader base, and a surface that could be reshaped more easily. Leather straps still held these early wooden skates in place, clinging to ankles as humans shuffled and pushed across frozen waters. Imagine the creak of wood stiffened by cold, the muted friction as it brushed ice, less slippery perhaps than bone, yet sturdier and more enduring. This was not the beginning of modern skating, not yet, but it was a quiet step toward it, an incremental improvement hidden in the soft folds of time. Wooden skates may not sound remarkable, and perhaps they were not, but their persistence across winters tells us of slow ingenuity, of small changes that made life just a little easier, year after cold year. And then, as we float forward into the 12th century, our thoughts come to Belgium, where the story of skating gathered another layer of quiet detail. Here, written records and accounts speak softly of wooden skates fitted with iron blades, marking one of the earliest documentations of this innovation. To attach iron to wood was not a matter of haste but of careful craftsmanship. The wood formed the supportive base, shaped to hold the foot, while thin strips of iron were affixed beneath, polished enough to offer a smoother slide upon frozen canals and rivers. The presence of written words confirming their existence adds a different kind of weight, for what is written becomes harder to forget. The skates of Belgium in this time were not just tools but early examples of recorded human adaptation, noted perhaps in guild records or chronicles. Picture a figure strapping them on, leather cords tightening against a wooden frame, while the iron edges rested patiently against ice, ready to carve out the faintest grooves of movement. Nothing swift, nothing flamboyant, just a modest improvement made visible in the documents of the age, allowing us to drift back to them with certainty. With a breath as slow as turning pages, we move into the 13th century, where Germany preserved the presence of skates not in fragments of wood or rusting iron, but in the carefully drawn lines of medieval manuscripts. These illustrations, modest and unadorned, depict figures upon ice, their feet bound to wooden skates. The drawings did not exaggerate, they did not seek to impress, but they quietly confirmed that skating was known, practiced, and thought worth recording in ink. To appear in a manuscript meant that skating had entered the visual imagination of the age, joining scenes of work, of faith, and of daily life. Wooden skates in Germany may have looked much like those in neighboring lands, shaped from simple timber, with or without the iron edges, but their appearance in manuscripts gives them an air of permanence. They remind us that skating was not a curiosity, not a rare oddity, but a practice common enough to be familiar to scribes and viewers alike. These images, still faintly visible after centuries, become whispers of movement frozen in time, as steady and unhurried as the winters they once reflected. Gently onward, we arrive in the 14th century, where Sweden carried the story further. Here, wooden skates found new refinement through the more consistent use of iron blades attached securely to their wooden frames. No longer just strips added experimentally, these blades were fitted to provide smoother sliding, reducing friction and allowing a more deliberate glide. To glide upon ice with iron beneath the foot was different from scraping along on bone. It allowed momentum to carry the body further, reducing effort, and creating a motion that must have felt almost otherworldly compared to earlier tools. And yet, it was still slow, still restrained by leather bindings and crude fittings. One might imagine villagers moving across frozen lakes, their figures steady, their progress no longer as halting as before, but still measured, still ordinary. The innovation was not revolutionary in the sense of celebration, but evolutionary, a quiet adjustment that made life easier in cold months. Iron blades in Sweden were both practical and symbolic, marking a steady advance in the patient dialogue between people and their winters. And softly, almost predictably, the narrative carries us into the 15th century, where the Netherlands once again takes a central role. By this time, iron-bladed skates had spread widely, their use becoming not just a necessity for transport but also a source of recreation. The frozen canals of the Dutch landscape, long and flat, became highways of winter, and also playgrounds. To see people glide, bundled in wool and leather, across the shining surfaces must have felt both useful and quietly beautiful. Iron edges meant journeys could be faster, smoother, and less tiring, and so skating became woven into the fabric of Dutch life. It was no longer only about reaching one's destination, it became about enjoying the movement itself, about turning necessity into custom, and custom into pleasure. These skates, sturdier and more reliable than any that came before, became common, ordinary, almost unremarkable. Yet in their ordinariness lay their power. They made winter less a barrier, more a season of travel and gathering, of silent sliding across frozen mirrors that stretched through the heart of the land. In their quiet way, they reshaped the relationship between people and ice, one slow scrape, one gentle glide at a time. Softly, as though a thin mist drifts across a winter meadow, we find ourselves in England around the middle of the 15th century. The rivers and ponds of this island nation, when stilled by frost, became gentle pathways for those who strapped skates beneath their feet. The skates here were often of wood with iron blades, echoes of the Dutch and Scandinavian designs, yet adapted for the familiar landscapes of the Thames and smaller waterways. Travel upon these frozen surfaces was practical, yes, but it carried with it a peculiar rhythm, a scraping, gliding movement that transformed the ordinary act of walking into something elongated and unhurried. Imagine merchants or villagers, bundled against the cold, pressing onward across a frozen pond, each push carrying them further than steps on land could allow. These moments were not glamorous, not heroic, but simply functional, ordinary people reshaping their relationship with ice-covered terrain. The skates left delicate grooves upon the surface, faint reminders of their passing, soon blurred by snow or thaw. Such fleeting traces remind us that history often lies not in grand events, but in quiet, repeated acts, layered one upon another like ripples upon frozen water. And then, as though the story wished to wander southward, it carries us into Italy around the year 1500. Though the climate here did not invite skating as naturally as the colder north, artistic depictions began to reveal figures upon canals and lakes, caught in the act of gliding upon ice. Paintings and sketches from the Renaissance, a period more often associated with frescoes and domes, carried within them the humble image of skaters. These depictions may have been inspired by travelers' tales, or by occasional freezes that hardened water even in more temperate lands. The artists, fascinated by human movement, translated the awkward, deliberate stances of skaters into delicate lines and brushstrokes. The figures they drew were not athletes but ordinary people, bending knees, leaning forward, balancing against the unfamiliar glide of iron upon ice. To include skating in art was to acknowledge it as part of human experience, small and unremarkable, yet worth capturing. It tells us that skating had reached beyond its northern origins, seeping softly into the visual imagination of lands less accustomed to long winters. The images themselves, preserved on paper or canvas, became a frozen reflection of frozen travel. Gently onward, the quiet canals of the Netherlands draw us once again, this time into the mid-16th century, where recreational skating began to step into the lives of the nobility. Once a tool of peasants and merchants, skating on frozen waterways now became a pastime for those of higher rank. Paintings of the period, like those by Pieter Bruegel the Elder, capture frozen scenes teeming with figures, children, laborers, nobles, all sharing the ice. It is here that skating shifted from necessity to amusement, transforming into an activity to be observed and enjoyed, a social gathering as much as a method of movement. Nobles, wrapped in fine garments, strapped skates to their feet and joined the throngs, perhaps laughing softly as they tested their balance on iron blades. This gentle democratization of ice was unusual, for few pastimes allowed such mingling between classes, but winter's frozen surfaces cared little for wealth or station. The ice became a stage where everyone, noble and commoner alike, moved with the same slow slides and careful balance. And in this mingling, skating found a new identity, not only survival, not only art, but also joy. With an almost hushed inevitability, we drift toward Scandinavia in the 17th century, where wooden skates with long iron blades became vital companions for winter transport. The northern lands, veiled in snow for long months, required ways of moving across frozen terrain that were practical, durable, and dependable. The skates of this era grew longer in blade, allowing for greater stability and smoother gliding across uneven surfaces of ice. They were bound tightly with leather straps or wooden clamps, crafted with patient care by local hands. These were not luxury items, but tools of endurance, designed to carry hunters, traders, and travelers across lakes and rivers that otherwise would be barriers. One might imagine a solitary figure pushing across a vast sheet of ice, the iron beneath their feet humming faintly against the cold surface, their progress steady, unhurried, and quiet. It was not a sport, not yet, but a continuation of the long relationship between people and ice, each winter demanding its own solutions, each fate a modest response. This was skating as necessity, unembellished and ordinary, and yet so central to daily survival that it was taken almost for granted. And now, as softly as the wind across a frozen canal, we return to the Netherlands once more, into the year 1650, when the first organized skating competitions were recorded. What had once been travel, then amusement, now began to shape itself into contest, though still in a modest, communal fashion. Competitions were often simple races, perhaps across stretches of frozen rivers or canals, where participants tested their skill in balancing, gliding, and propelling themselves forward. These events were not elaborate spectacles, but community gatherings, with villagers watching, cheering quietly, or simply observing as neighbors and friends competed upon the ice. Records mention these early races, confirming that skating had moved firmly into the realm of recreation and sport. It is curious to think of iron-bladed skates, once tools of survival, now marking the start of competitive tradition, their scrape and hiss echoing not only necessity but also enjoyment. The competitions, small though they were, became another thread in the fabric of skating's history, slow, steady, and inevitable, like grooves pressed gently into the frozen surface of a Dutch canal, fading slowly as the thaw returned. Softly, we drift into the long winters of Russia around the year 1700, where iron-bladed skates had by then become not a novelty, but a familiar companion for both travel and sport. Across the great rivers and lakes that froze into wide expanses, people used these skates to shorten distances, to reach markets, to visit neighbors, and also, when time allowed, to play upon the ice. Iron blades provided smoother motion than wood or bone ever had, their sharpened edges cutting with steadier ease into the frozen surface. Travel was faster, though still measured, for balance and patience remained necessary with every stride. Yet the same tool that carried peasants across villages also carried nobles into winter amusements, for skating had begun to slip gently from survival into recreation. Russian winters, so long and so dominating, offered a stage vast enough for both. Some accounts suggest even Catherine the Great enjoyed watching skating, its quiet beauty matching the grandeur of frozen palace grounds. The skates themselves were plain, strapped tightly to leather boots, their iron glinting in pale sunlight. No one thought them extraordinary, for they were part of life, like fur cloaks or sledges. And still, in their ordinariness, they whispered of adaptation, of humans reshaping cold into something bearable, even pleasurable. As the frozen breath of time carries us to mid-18th century England, we find another delicate step in skating's story, the formation of skating clubs among the upper classes. Around 1742, in Edinburgh, the world's first known figure skating club was formed, and in England similar groups soon followed. These clubs were not hurried gatherings, but carefully organized societies where gentlemen of means came together to glide on frozen ponds. Membership was exclusive, requiring not only wealth but often demonstration of skill. Members practiced not only straightforward gliding, but also figures and turns, laying the quiet groundwork for what would much later become artistic skating. The idea of a club turned skating from a scattered pastime into a recognized social activity, one that carried with it prestige and shared identity. Imagine the stillness of a frosted park pond, upon which well-dressed men, in wigs and coats, traced deliberate patterns, their iron blades scratching faint designs into the ice. Around them, nature was silent, broken only by the occasional crack of shifting ice or the whisper of steel against frost. These clubs remind us that skating was beginning to be shaped not only by geography and necessity, but also by culture and class. And then, gently as though guided by a thin ribbon of water, we return to the Netherlands in the year 1780, where canal skating had taken on the air of celebration within winter festivals. The canals, long ribbons of frozen water threading through towns and countryside, became gathering places. During hard frosts, entire communities would come together, not just to travel but to rejoice in the season, turning skating into both spectacle and festivity. Paintings from the Dutch Golden Age, though earlier, had already captured such scenes, hundreds of figures, some steady, some tumbling, some simply watching. By the late 18th century, these gatherings had become traditions, woven into the rhythm of Dutch winters. Stalls might appear along the ice, selling warm drinks, while groups skated hand in hand, or in playful races across the glassy surface. The canals were no longer merely roads of frozen necessity, but also stages of joy and togetherness, where recreation spread across classes, inviting everyone to join. The hiss of blades, the laughter of children, the cautious sliding of the elderly, each sound mingled into a winter chorus that was both ordinary and enduring. And so, skating found itself not just in survival, or in aristocratic clubs, but in the everyday joy of whole communities. With a slow turn, the story carries us across the Atlantic, where by the year 1800, ice skating was introduced to what would become the United States, brought there by Dutch settlers in New York. In the colony of New Netherland, long before it was renamed New York, Dutch immigrants had carried with them their customs, including the art of skating upon frozen rivers. Generations later, as winter settled over the Hudson River and nearby ponds, skating quietly took root. At first it remained a local pastime, small in scale, echoing the Dutch ways of fastening skates and pushing across ice with deliberate steps. But as the 18th century tipped into the 19th, the practice grew, spreading among American communities who discovered the quiet pleasure of gliding across frozen water. The skates in use were often imported, or made in the old styles of wood and iron, strapped firmly to boots, their construction simple but sufficient. The Dutch settlers had not only carried across the ocean their language, foods, and traditions, but also this gentle habit of winter, which in time would grow into one of America's favored cold-weather recreations. What began as an immigrant's memory became, slowly, a shared tradition on new soil. And now, as softly as steel gleams under pale light, we step into the year 1820 in England, where a quiet but important improvement arrived, the introduction of steel blades. Steel, stronger and sharper than iron, allowed edges to be fashioned with precision, holding their form longer against the endless abrasion of ice. Skaters now could glide more smoothly, turn with greater confidence, and maintain their blades without constant reshaping. The shift was not merely one of material but of experience. The feel of skating on steel was subtly different, lighter, surer, more responsive. These blades could be forged thinner, offering less resistance, yet strong enough to carry the weight of the skater with grace. This advancement laid the groundwork for the flowering of both speed and figure skating, though at the time it was simply regarded as another refinement. Craftsmen produced steel-bladed skates with care, attaching them to wooden platforms or boots, their polished surfaces catching the faint winter sun. Though the improvement may have seemed minor, its effect lingered, reshaping the possibilities of movement on ice. And so, a small technological step became another whisper in the long, patient story of skating, a tale still unfolding across centuries. With a quiet turning of the seasons, we find ourselves in Sweden around the year 1840, where the story of skating took an unusual path upon dry land. Skating itself was bound to winter, tied to frozen rivers and lakes, but athletes and enthusiasts longed for ways to maintain their strength and balance even when the ice had melted. To bridge this seasonal gap, early forms of training devices appeared, wooden boards fitted with wheels, allowing skaters to mimic the motions of gliding across frozen water. These contraptions, though far from the modern skateboard we recognize today, offered a way of rehearsing the rhythm of skating, the shifting of weight, and the delicate coordination of arms and legs. Imagine a Swedish village road, its surface hard and clear in summer, and upon it a skater rolling forward, practicing strokes that in winter would carve smooth lines across ice. It may have looked odd to passers-by, yet for those determined to keep their skills alive, it was both ingenious and practical. This blending of seasons, ice skills carried into the dry months, helped create a more continuous culture of skating, one less dependent on fleeting winters alone. And though such devices remained modest, they whispered of the human desire to adapt, to stretch a beloved activity beyond the constraints of climate and season, carrying its spirit into months where water no longer froze. Drifting onward, we step into the Netherlands of the 1850s, where the idea of skating spaces began to change from what nature provided to what human hands could build. Until then, frozen canals and ponds had served as the natural arenas of the sport, their unpredictability both cherished and frustrating. But as interest in skating grew, the first dedicated skating rinks began to be constructed, carefully prepared areas where the surface could be managed, maintained, and used more reliably. These rinks were often simple at first, bordered plots of ice in parks or open fields, but they represented a shift from dependence on weather toward controlled recreation. The Dutch, with their deep traditions of canal skating, were among the earliest to embrace this innovation, understanding that festivals, competitions, and lessons could unfold more easily when the surface was dependable. A rink was not only a place for skating, but also a gathering point, where families came to watch and where communities celebrated winter together. The sound of steel against the carefully tended ice echoed differently than on wild canals, sharper, more predictable, a little like the steady hum of a crafted instrument compared to the irregular music of the wind. With these rinks, skating became more accessible, less a matter of chance and more a certainty, a promise of smooth gliding whenever the season allowed. And then, almost like the faint tracing of a blade into fresh ice, we arrive in England during the 1860s, where figure skating began to emerge as a distinct and formalized recreational activity. For centuries, skaters had made patterns on the ice, circling, looping, or curving simply for pleasure, but now these movements were shaped into recognizable figures, practiced with intent and precision. The Edinburgh Skating Club, founded in the previous century, had already cultivated such practices, but it was in this period that the art began spreading more widely, nurtured by a growing fascination with elegance and display. Manuals appeared, describing how to execute figures, from simple circles to elaborate loops, and skaters competed informally to show skill and precision and grace. The activity began to shift from being merely about speed or travel to being about artistry, with emphasis on posture, balance, and control. Imagine a frozen English pond, where the sun glints off long coats and scarves, and upon it a skater glides deliberately, tracing a figure eight so carefully that the lines remain sharp long after they pass. This merging of sport and art suited Victorian sensibilities, where recreation was often paired with refinement, and so skating began its slow transformation into a performance as well as a pastime. Moving forward with the measured rhythm of gliding steps, we enter Russia in the year 1870, where St. Petersburg saw the creation of the nation's first figure skating club. Here, amidst palaces and long winters, skating was elevated into organized form, reflecting Russia's growing fascination with European pastimes. The establishment of such a club provided not only a place for enthusiasts to gather, but also a structure for teaching, practicing, and displaying skills. The Russian winters, with their enduring ice, had always offered ample opportunity for skating, yet until then much of it was casual, unorganized, a part of everyday life rather than a cultivated art. The new club drew inspiration from the traditions of England and Scotland, blending them with Russian enthusiasm for spectacle and elegance. Within its grounds, skaters practiced the intricate figures that were gaining popularity across Europe, while spectators gathered to watch, wrapped in furs against the biting air. It is easy to imagine the stillness of a St. Petersburg morning, the Neva River frozen nearby, and in a cleared space of ice, figures being drawn and redrawn by dedicated skaters. The creation of this club marked the beginning of Russia's long and influential role in figure skating, one that in time would shape the sport across the globe. With another gentle pause, we cross the ocean once more, reaching the United States in the 1880s, where innovation in skate design brought forth a significant improvement, patented ice skates with adjustable steel blades. Until then, blades were often fixed, requiring careful fitting and offering little flexibility for adjustment. The new designs allowed skaters to alter the position and tightness of their blades, improving comfort and control. Patents from this decade reveal inventive mechanisms, some using screws or clamps, that allowed the blade to be removed or repositioned without replacing the entire skate. This was particularly valuable in a country where skating was spreading quickly, and where practicality and adaptability were prized. Skaters no longer had to endure poorly fitting blades or commission new ones when their needs changed. Instead, a single pair could serve across variations of ice and activity. This development not only made skating more accessible but also hinted at the coming age of technical refinement, where equipment would evolve hand in hand with the ambitions of the sport. Imagine the sound of a skater in a New England winter, their steel blades adjusted just right, carrying them smoothly across the frozen pond, confident that their equipment was as reliable as the ice beneath them. In this subtle shift of design, the sport edged quietly closer to the modern era, one small adjustment at a time. There is something quietly serene about drifting into Canada in the year 1890, when speed skating competitions began to take shape upon the frozen expanses of rivers and lakes. Skating in this form had long been a means of travel and winter play, but now, In the crisp Canadian air, it became something structured, measured, and timed. Competitors lined up not merely to glide, but to test who could cross the ice most swiftly, their strides lengthening, their bodies leaning forward, their steel blades cutting sharp, narrow lines in the ice. These early races were not yet the grand spectacles that would later fill arenas, but rather community gatherings, often held outdoors, where friends, families, and curious onlookers gathered in scarves and heavy coats to watch the contests unfold. The distances varied, sometimes short bursts of speed, other times long, enduring stretches that required pacing and stamina. The ice itself, never quite predictable, added its own challenges, soft patches, cracks, or sudden ridges that could test even the most skilled skater. Yet this uncertainty was part of the appeal, part of the natural rhythm of racing across wild ice. And though the competitions were modest, they marked the beginning of speed skating as a true sport in Canada, one that would, in time, become intertwined with national identity, celebrated for its blend of endurance, power, and the simple, timeless pleasure of movement across frozen water. With a gentle glide we move into Norway, around 1900, where the development of racing skates with lightweight steel blades quietly reshaped the sport. Skaters had long used iron or heavier steel, sturdy but not always efficient, demanding more effort to maintain speed. The introduction of lighter steel brought a subtle transformation, allowing skaters to push harder, glide further, and recover more quickly between strides. Imagine a skater leaning low, their arm swinging forward in rhythm, their blade whispering against the ice with less drag than before. The blade's thin edge, honed with care, sliced the surface cleanly, conserving energy while maximizing distance. It was not merely a technical improvement but also a shift in the way races could be approached. Longer distances became more accessible, strategies evolved, and times improved steadily. Norway, with its long winters and cultural affinity for ice and snow, became a fertile ground for such innovations, with craftsmen and athletes alike seeking ways to perfect the equipment. The lighter blades did not change the essence of skating, the rhythmic stride, the sound of steel on ice remained the same, but they extended what was possible, expanding the horizons of speed skating with a quiet elegance that suited the patient, deliberate nature of the sport. And as the first decade of the 20th century unfolded, we drift across the ocean to the United States, where by 1910 figure skating had stepped into the realm of competitive sport. What had once been a graceful pastime, enjoyed on ponds and lakes for the sheer pleasure of movement, now gained formal structure, with rules, judges, and organized events. The United States Figure Skating Association would later solidify the framework, but even in these earlier years the seeds of competition were sprouting. Skaters performed not just for themselves, but for audiences and evaluators, tracing figures with precision, executing turns, and balancing artistry with athletic skill. The competitive nature did not diminish the grace of the sport, rather, it highlighted it, placing value on control, poise, and the ability to glide with intention. The elegance of figure skating, combined with its growing popularity, made it appealing as both a sport and a spectacle, and it began to attract dedicated athletes who trained rigorously to perfect their routines. One might picture a skater stepping onto a sheet of ice under the dim glow of lantern light, their breath visible in the cold, ready to trace a perfect loop or carve a balanced turn, knowing that each mark on the ice was not only for personal satisfaction, but also for the quiet judgment of others. Floating softly onward, we arrive in Europe in the year 1920, where the introduction of toe picks transformed figure skating in ways both subtle and profound. Before this innovation, jumps and certain spins were difficult, sometimes nearly impossible, for skaters to execute cleanly. The toe pick, a small serrated projection at the front of the blade, gave skaters the ability to dig into the ice, to vault themselves upward, and to pivot with greater control. It seems such a minor addition, so small that to the casual eye it might go unnoticed, yet its impact was vast. With toe picks, the vocabulary of figure skating expanded, lifts, jumps, and more complex spins became achievable, and routines began to reach new heights of athleticism and artistry. In the quiet image of a skater preparing for a jump, one can see the toe pick pressed gently into the ice, gripping for an instant before releasing the body into the air. It is a fleeting moment, barely noticed, but one that underpins the magic of movement that follows. This single adaptation of design helped bridge figure skating from a graceful gliding art into the more acrobatic and dazzling performances that the 20th century would come to admire. And now, with an almost imperceptible turn, we find ourselves in the United States once again, around the year 1930, where ice hockey skates were refined and optimized for speed and maneuverability. Unlike figure skating or speed skating, hockey demanded quick bursts, sudden stops, and rapid changes of direction, requiring the blade and boot tailored to those needs. The blades grew shorter and more curved, allowing players to pivot and turn with agility, while the boots became sturdier to protect against collisions and flying pucks. The sharpening of these blades was often more pronounced, creating edges that could bite into the ice for explosive acceleration or sudden halts. To watch an early hockey player dash across the rink, stop in a spray of ice, and then reverse course was to see the effect of equipment carefully matched to purpose. The evolution of hockey skates reflected not only the demands of the sport but also the growing professionalization of ice hockey itself, particularly in North America, where the game's popularity surged in the early 20th century. In these design adjustments, curved blades, strong boots, precise edges, we glimpse how the ice could be shaped not only by culture and tradition, but by the specific rhythms of a game, tuned to the flick of a puck and the shouts of players chasing it across the cold, echoing arena. There is a kind of quiet inevitability as we drift into Europe of the 1940s, where the gradual shift toward all-metal boots and blades in competitive skating finally reached a sense of standardization. Earlier decades had seen mixtures of wood, leather, and steel, with skates often cobbled together in ways that reflected tradition as much as innovation. But in the crucible of competition, sturdiness and consistency grew paramount, and the move to all-metal construction gave skaters both. These boots, rigid and unyielding, were less about comfort and more about transmitting every ounce of strength into the blade below. The blade itself, also crafted entirely from metal, carried the advantage of uniformity, each edge sharpened to perfection, each curve designed to hold steady under the strain of high speeds and precise maneuvers. To the eye they might have looked harsh, lacking the soft leather that once wrapped around the ankle, yet they represented a form of discipline, a tool refined not for leisure but for the pursuit of excellence. In the echoing rinks of wartime and post-war Europe, one could hear the crisp, metallic bite of these skates pressing into the ice, a sound both efficient and uncompromising. And though some lamented the loss of traditional materials, the durability and strength of all-metal construction aligned neatly with the era's broader emphasis on engineering and industrial design, creating a foundation that would support generations of athletes who sought not beauty alone, but also unshakable performance. With a slow breath, we move into Russia of the 1950s, where the careful construction of organized training programs for Olympic figure skating quietly began to unfold. These were not casual lessons on frozen rivers or impromptu gatherings on village ponds, but systematic regimens designed with precision, reflecting both scientific study and national ambition. Coaches developed schedules that spanned years, nurturing children into athletes through repeated drills, conditioning, and the study of technique. Office training was emphasized alongside hours on frozen surfaces, with ballet, gymnastics, and stretching woven into the preparation, ensuring that grace accompanied power. This era marked the birth of Russia's long legacy in figure skating, where skaters were guided not only by personal passion but also by the weight of national expectation. Imagine a young skater, perhaps no more than 12, rising before dawn, stepping into a state-run rink as the lamps cast pale light on the frosted windows, each movement watched and corrected with careful detail. These programs were strict, sometimes grueling, but they produced results, athletes capable of executing complex jumps and spins with precision, carrying themselves with an elegance that felt both natural and disciplined. In this blend of structure and artistry, Russia established itself as a powerhouse in figure skating, a tradition that would endure for decades, rooted in the seeds planted in those systematic programs of the 1950s. And so we drift toward the United States in the 1960s, where a quieter revolution unfolded in the very boots that wrapped around the skaters' ankles. The introduction of synthetic materials, lightweight plastics, composite reinforcements, and modern adhesives, began to replace heavier leathers and metals, subtly improving comfort without sacrificing performance. For generations, skaters had endured boots that were stiff, heavy, and often slow to break in, leaving ankles sore and movements restricted until the material yielded. Synthetic construction offered a new kind of resilience, boots that molded more easily to the foot, held their shape longer, and resisted the dampness that came from melted ice and long hours of use. This was not merely a matter of comfort, it also meant that skaters could train longer, recover faster, and trust that their equipment would remain consistent from one session to the next. The ice rinks of the 60s echoed with the same familiar sounds of blades carving circles and lines, yet hidden within those sounds was this small but meaningful shift, the whisper of modern science lending support to the timeless practice of gliding on frozen water. It is a reminder that sometimes the gentlest advances, nearly invisible to the eye, can shape the way an activity is experienced, allowing athletes to feel freer, lighter, more connected to the movement itself. Letting the thought stretch gently onward, we find ourselves in Canada in the 1970s, where hockey skates continued their patient evolution, now reinforced with greater ankle support. Hockey had grown faster, rougher, more demanding, and the equipment needed to follow suit. The boot became sturdier, rising higher up the ankle, its padding thickened to absorb impact, its structure reinforced to resist twisting injuries. These changes, subtle at first glance, gave players a newfound sense of security, allowing them to push harder against the ice without fear of collapse or strain. The blades remained curved for agility, but now the skater's body rested above them with added protection, encased in boots that blended resilience with mobility. Picture a crowded rink, players darting in all directions, their movements sharp, sudden, unpredictable. In that environment, a well-supported ankle could mean the difference between a confident stop and a painful tumble. The reinforced skates mirrored the sport itself, tougher, faster, more physical, adapting quietly so that the game could continue at its accelerating pace. And though the players may not have thought much about the engineering beneath their feet, each stride, each stop, each quick pivot was made safer and more efficient because of this deliberate strengthening. It is another reminder of how deeply the details of equipment shape the rhythm of sport, even if the details remain largely unseen. With one last soft glide into this segment, we reach Europe in the 1980s, where professional speed skating blades were refined yet again, this time through the use of stainless steel. The material may sound simple, even ordinary, but its application transformed the sport with quiet certainty. Stainless steel, resistant to corrosion, maintained its edge longer, requiring less frequent sharpening and offering a more consistent glide across ice. The blades shone with a particular luster, smooth and durable, capable of enduring the repeated stresses of long races and rigorous training. Skaters could trust that their equipment would remain reliable, that the edge beneath them would not dull too quickly nor warp under pressure. The adoption of stainless steel was not about spectacle but about stability, about creating conditions where athletes could focus entirely on their performance rather than the vulnerabilities of their tools. Imagine the calm before a race, a skater crouched low at the starting line, knowing that every ounce of energy they would release into their stride would be faithfully transmitted by the blade below. This quiet confidence, supported by the subtle improvement of material, allowed speed skating to progress smoothly into a more modern age. It is a story not of dazzling invention but of refinement, a soft polishing of details, the kind of change that might go unnoticed by most but means everything to those who live upon the ice. Drifting gently into the United States of 1990, we find ourselves in the quietly elegant world of ice dancing, a discipline that had, by this time, gained prominence on the Olympic stage. Ice dancing differs softly from other forms of figure skating, emphasizing rhythm, musicality, and partnership rather than jumps or speed. Pairs move in unison, gliding with measured steps across the ice, their patterns forming a language of subtlety and grace, often so intricate that a casual observer might scarcely notice the precision required. By the Olympics, the discipline had matured, guided by a set of rules that dictated everything from lift duration to step sequence, yet the soul of ice dancing remained artistic expression. Judges and spectators alike came to appreciate the delicate balance between athleticism and choreography, where the skaters' connection to each other, the ice, and the music was scrutinized carefully. Competitors trained for hours, refining posture, timing, and the gentle mechanics of weight transfer, all while maintaining the appearance of effortless gliding. Imagine a rink, quiet except for the distant echo of blades on ice, and a pair moving in harmony, the soft swish of steel punctuating the frozen air. The discipline's Olympic recognition cemented its legitimacy, encouraging national programs to invest in coaching, choreography, and practice facilities. Ice dancing's rise to prominence is a study in subtlety, demonstrating that not all athletic achievement relies on speed or strength, but sometimes on quiet, sustained elegance, practiced with patience and care. Softly, as the new millennium dawned, skating technology embraced a whisper of innovation with the introduction of carbon fiber and composite materials in skate design on a global scale. These materials, so light and yet so strong, allowed skaters to experience reduced weight in their boots while maintaining stiffness and support, a combination that subtly enhanced control and endurance. Carbon fiber, with its unique weave, provided resistance to twisting forces, while composites offered cushioning and flexibility where needed. The change was nearly imperceptible to the casual observer, yet profound to the athlete, for the boot became an extension of the body, transmitting motion with more efficiency and less fatigue. Manufacturers experimented with layering, molding, and integrating these materials to optimize performance for both speed skating and figure skating, tailoring the balance of rigidity and pliancy to the precise demands of each discipline. Imagine a skater rising from the ice after a practiced turn, feeling the boot respond immediately, every edge on the blade perfectly aligned, every subtle shift of weight conveyed without resistance or slack. This quiet technological revolution marked a new era, where material science began to intertwine with centuries of tradition, enhancing the experience of skating while maintaining the artistry and rhythm that have always defined it. Even as the ice remains cold and silent, these hidden advancements whisper gently beneath the feet of skaters, unseen yet vital. Floating onward to the Netherlands in the year 2010, we encounter the clap skate, a quietly transformative innovation that subtly revolutionized speed skating performance. Unlike traditional fixed-blade designs, the clap skate features a hinge at the front of the boot, allowing the blade to remain in contact with the ice longer while the heel lifts, increasing the efficiency of each stride. This design change, nearly imperceptible when first introduced, allows skaters to generate greater propulsion with less energy, smoothing the transition between strokes and extending glide duration. Initially met with curiosity and careful scrutiny, clap skates quickly demonstrated measurable improvements in times and endurance, altering training methods and race strategies. Coaches and athletes alike had to adjust the subtleties of body lean, ankle flex, and push-off timing, for even the smallest misalignment could compromise the advantage. Visualize a skater on a frozen canal, the motion nearly liquid, each push synchronized with the flexing hinge, the steel whispering a steady rhythm over the ice. The adoption of clap skates reshaped the competitive landscape quietly but definitively, emphasizing the relationship between human biomechanics and mechanical design, a reminder that even centuries after the first bone skates, innovation could continue to refine the delicate art of moving gracefully across frozen surfaces. Drifting softly into South Korea in the year 2012, we encounter a subtler, yet profoundly personal, development, custom-fitted figure skates for elite athletes. Gone were the days when a well-selected size and careful breaking-in sufficed. Advanced molding techniques allowed boots to be shaped precisely to the contours of an individual's foot, ankle, and arch, offering unparalleled support, alignment, and responsiveness. This level of customization reduced the risk of blisters, fatigue, and misalignment, permitting skaters to perform increasingly complex jumps, spins, and footwork sequences with confidence. Each pair of skates became almost a second skin, integrating form and function with intimate precision. Imagine the quiet focus of an athlete as they step into these perfectly contoured boots, feeling the ice beneath respond with an almost telepathic immediacy, each edge communicating every subtle shift of balance. Coaches monitored performance, sometimes using video and motion analysis, but the essential innovation was tactile, experienced directly in the sensation of gliding and pivoting. Custom-fitted skates represent a convergence of technology, anatomy, and tradition, quietly enabling the continuation of a centuries-long pursuit of perfection on ice, without altering the timeless poetry of movement that has always defined figure skating. Floating with gentle deliberation to Russia in the year 2014, we encounter the integration of 3D scanning into ice skate manufacturing, a quiet innovation that marries precision engineering with centuries of craft. 3D scanning allows for the exact mapping of an athlete's foot, capturing contours, pressure points, and alignment with meticulous detail. From this digital model, boots can be crafted to an almost impossibly precise fit, reducing discomfort and optimizing performance, while preserving the nuanced mechanics of skating. This process also allows subtle adjustments for balance, weight distribution, and support, translating the human form into equipment that feels like a natural extension of the body. Imagine a skater stepping into a pair of skates engineered from a digital scan, the fit so exact that the blades respond effortlessly to every movement, every subtle shift, as though the ice and the skater had been calibrated together. The adoption of 3D scanning represents a blending of soft, human artistry with technical exactitude, a modern echo of centuries of experimentation with bones, wood, iron, and steel. It quietly redefines the relationship between skater and ice, allowing precision and comfort to coexist in a way that supports the continuing evolution of the sport, even as the motion remains as fluid and hypnotic as ever. Drifting gently into the United States of 1990, we find ourselves in the quietly elegant world of ice dancing, a discipline that had, by this time, gained prominence on the Olympic stage. Ice dancing differs softly from other forms of figure skating, emphasizing rhythm, musicality, and partnership rather than jumps or speed. Pairs move in unison, gliding with measured steps across the ice, their patterns forming a language of subtlety and grace, often so intricate that a casual observer might scarcely notice the precision required. By the Olympics, the discipline had matured, guided by a set of rules that dictated everything from lift duration to step sequence, yet the soul of ice dancing remained artistic expression. Judges and spectators alike came to appreciate the delicate balance between athleticism and choreography, where the skaters' connection to each other, the ice, and the music was scrutinized carefully. Competitors trained for hours, refining posture, timing, and the gentle mechanics of weight transfer, all while maintaining the appearance of effortless gliding. Imagine a rink, quiet except for the distant echo of blades on ice, and a pair moving in harmony, the soft swish of steel punctuating the frozen air. The discipline's Olympic recognition cemented its legitimacy, encouraging national programs to invest in coaching, choreography, and practice facilities. Ice dancing's rise to prominence is a study in subtlety, demonstrating that not all athletic achievement relies on speed or strength, but sometimes on quiet, sustained elegance, practiced with patience and care. Softly, as the new millennium dawned, skating technology embraced a whisper of innovation with the introduction of carbon fiber and composite materials in skate design on a global scale. These materials, so light and yet so strong, allowed skaters to experience reduced weight in their boots while maintaining stiffness and support, a combination that subtly enhanced control and endurance. Carbon fiber, with its unique weave, provided resistance to twisting forces, while composites offered cushioning and flexibility where needed. The change was nearly imperceptible to the casual observer, yet profound to the athlete, for the boot became an extension of the body, transmitting motion with more efficiency and less fatigue. Manufacturers experimented with layering, molding, and integrating these materials to optimize performance for both speed skating and figure skating, tailoring the balance of rigidity and pliancy to the precise demands of each discipline. Imagine a skater rising from the ice after a practiced turn, feeling the boot respond immediately, every edge on the blade perfectly aligned, every subtle shift of weight conveyed without resistance or slack. This quiet technological revolution marked a new era, where material science began to intertwine with centuries of tradition, enhancing the experience of skating while maintaining the artistry and rhythm that have always defined it. Even as the ice remains cold and silent, these hidden advancements whisper gently beneath the feet of skaters, unseen yet vital. Floating onward to the Netherlands in the year 2010, we encounter the clap skate, a quietly transformative innovation that subtly revolutionized speed skating performance. Unlike traditional fixed-blade designs, the clap skate features a hinge at the front of the boot, allowing the blade to remain in contact with the ice longer while the heel lifts, increasing the efficiency of each stride. This design change, nearly imperceptible when first introduced, allows skaters to generate greater propulsion with less energy, smoothing the transition between strokes and extending glide duration. Initially met with curiosity and careful scrutiny, clap skates quickly demonstrated measurable improvements in times and endurance, altering training methods and race strategies. Coaches and athletes alike had to adjust the subtleties of body lean, ankle flex, and push-off timing, for even the smallest misalignment could compromise the advantage. Visualize a skater on a frozen canal, the motion nearly liquid, each push synchronized with the flexing hinge, the steel whispering a steady rhythm over the ice. The adoption of clap skates reshaped the competitive landscape quietly but definitively, emphasizing the relationship between human biomechanics and mechanical design, a reminder that even centuries after the first bone skates, innovation could continue to refine the delicate art of moving gracefully across frozen surfaces. Drifting softly into South Korea in the year 2012, we encounter a subtler, yet profoundly personal, development: custom-fitted figure skates for elite athletes. Gone were the days when a well-selected size and careful breaking-in sufficed. Advanced molding techniques allowed boots to be shaped precisely to the contours of an individual's foot, ankle, and arch, offering unparalleled support, alignment, and responsiveness. This level of customization reduced the risk of blisters, fatigue, and misalignment, permitting skaters to perform increasingly complex jumps, spins, and footwork sequences with confidence. Each pair of skates became almost a second skin, integrating form and function with intimate precision. Imagine the quiet focus of an athlete as they step into these perfectly contoured boots, feeling the ice beneath respond with an almost telepathic immediacy, each edge communicating every subtle shift of balance. Coaches monitored performance, sometimes using video and motion analysis, but the essential innovation was tactile, experienced directly in the sensation of gliding and pivoting. Custom-fitted skates represent a convergence of technology, anatomy, and tradition, quietly enabling the continuation of a centuries-long pursuit of perfection on ice, without altering the timeless poetry of movement that has always defined figure skating. Floating with gentle deliberation to Russia in the year 2014, we encounter the integration of 3D scanning into ice skate manufacturing, a quiet innovation that marries precision engineering with centuries of craft. 3D scanning allows for the exact mapping of an athlete's foot, capturing contours, pressure points, and alignment with meticulous detail. From this digital model, boots can be crafted to an almost impossibly precise fit, reducing discomfort and optimizing performance, while preserving the nuanced mechanics of skating. This process also allows subtle adjustments for balance, weight distribution, and support, translating the human form into equipment that feels like a natural extension of the body. Imagine a skater stepping into a pair of skates engineered from a digital scan, the fit so exact that the blades respond effortlessly to every movement, every subtle shift, as though the ice and the skater had been calibrated together. The adoption of 3D scanning represents a blending of soft, human artistry with technical exactitude, a modern echo of centuries of experimentation with bones, wood, iron, and steel. It quietly redefines the relationship between skater and ice, allowing precision and comfort to coexist in a way that supports the continuing evolution of the sport, even as the motion remains as fluid and hypnotic as ever. Drifting softly into the United States of 2023, we encounter the delicate emergence of advanced 3D printed skate components being trialed for elite figure skating. The idea is almost imperceptible at first glance: tiny alterations to the boot or blade, subtle adjustments in weight distribution or rigidity, all achieved through additive manufacturing, where material is layered with precision to create a form unattainable through traditional methods. Athletes testing these components find that the boots can be customized not only to the shape of the foot, but also to the exact stresses encountered during spins, jumps, and complex footwork sequences. Imagine a skater, preparing for a triple lutz, feeling the micro-precision of the boot as it flexes exactly where needed, the blade transmitting energy cleanly and efficiently to the ice below. These 3D printed elements allow experimentation with geometry, thickness, and support that would have been cumbersome, slow, or impossible using leather, steel, or even conventional composite materials. The process also allows for rapid prototyping. A coach or technician can adjust the component digitally, print a new piece overnight, and have the athlete test it the next day, refining the fit and performance iteratively. While the innovation might seem small in the grand sweep of skating history, it quietly exemplifies how centuries of incremental improvements, from bone, to wood, to steel, to carbon fiber, continue to converge, allowing the skater's connection to the ice to become ever more intimate, precise, and refined, almost imperceptibly enhancing the dance between human and frozen surface. Floating onward, the year 2024 introduces the gentle hum of artificial intelligence into the world of skating, as AI-assisted performance analysis becomes mainstream in professional arenas across the globe. These systems, often using high-speed cameras and motion capture sensors, meticulously track every micro-movement of the skater's body, the angle of the knee, the flexion of the ankle, the trajectory of a spin, or the subtle lean of the torso during a glide. Coaches can review this data, presented visually or numerically, to refine technique in ways previously dependent solely on human observation and intuition. Imagine a figure skating rink, the ice itself unaltered, yet under its silent surface, algorithms parse the delicate physics of each step, calculating the most efficient paths for rotation, force application, and balance. The AI does not intrude into the art, it merely observes and suggests, providing insights that allow athletes to train more intelligently, reduce injury risk, and gradually perfect the execution of demanding elements. It is a quiet revolution, invisible to spectators yet profoundly transformative for skaters, reflecting an ever-increasing interplay between tradition and technology. Through AI's patient analysis, each movement becomes part of a continuous feedback loop, a gentle refinement that elevates skill while preserving the subtle poetry of gliding, spinning, and floating across ice. And drifting gently into the global stage of 2025, we encounter the next generation of ice skates, integrating lightweight composites and smart sensors, a softly transformative convergence of material science and digital observation. These skates, feather-light yet rigid, allow athletes to feel the ice beneath their blades with unprecedented sensitivity, while embedded sensors quietly record data on weight distribution, stride length, edge pressure, and rotational velocity. The information can be transmitted wirelessly to coaches or analyzed in real time by algorithms, providing an almost invisible interface between skater, ice, and technology. Imagine the subtle feedback as a skater performs a quadruple jump, unaware of the tiny sensors measuring torque and angle, yet benefiting from insights these measurements provide over weeks of iterative refinement. Composite materials reduce fatigue, enhance precision, and respond consistently across temperature changes, while the smart components gently complement the natural biomechanics of the human body. This integration, delicate and almost poetic in its subtlety, reflects a continuation of centuries of evolution, from horse bones and iron blades to carbon fiber, 3D printing, AI, and now intelligent skates. Each layer of advancement whispers a quiet promise, to enable skaters to move with grace, efficiency, and artistry while the technology remains discreet, supporting rather than overshadowing the timeless dialogue between ice and blade. It is a gentle, patient enhancement, a slow unfolding of possibility beneath the frozen surface, quietly shaping the future of skating while preserving its ethereal beauty. Let us pause, ever so softly, to notice how each quiet innovation gently flows into the next, a continuum of small, deliberate steps that have carried skating from simple bone and leather to intelligent, responsive equipment. Each era, each adjustment, each material change whispers into the next, layering centuries of refinement like the delicate striations of ice on a winter pond. And so, with this gentle progression, we arrive naturally here, in the present moment, where skates themselves are almost alive with subtle responsiveness, guiding movement while remaining nearly invisible, a final note in the long, slow symphony of skating's evolution. If your eyes are closed, if your thoughts are drifting, then my job here is done for today. Thank you for spending this unremarkable moment with me. You have listened to The Sleepy Sloth, where uninteresting things become the softest lullabies.